Why do you say that, Father? You aren't afraid, are you?
No, but I respect some of the superstitions of others. Often they are founded in fact.
Broadcasting live from our Sanctum Sanctorum in Venice, California, this is the Sixth Sense Society. I'm your host, Krista, here with our producer, Michael, and today you're tuning in to Spell It Out, Magic, Reflections, and Shadows, where I pick a topic and run with it. Today I'm continuing my year theme of divination and divination tools with a topic around numbers. So divining with numbers is what I'm calling it, and it will include numerology, but some other aspects of using numbers to divine things. But before we get started, Michael has a few announcements.
Hi, everybody, and thanks again for tuning into our show. If you love what we do, click like and subscribe. It helps us more than anything else you can do. Next week, it's a special day, actually, this Sunday, the 10th. At 1 o'clock Pacific, we have our next 2-hour special. Our paranormal friends will be back, Holly Lindblom and Craig Owens and Jeff Mandel and Hillary and Jessica from Mystic Mitten Paranormal. And so we're going to get into all things ghost. And Holly and Craig will be joining us from another haunted location, from what I understand. So you guys are going to have to tune in to see what that's all about. And we have Madame Zulema coming up. We have Jackie Smith this coming month. So lots of great stuff. So get all the information on our website, sixthsensesociety.com, SIXTH, all spelled out. And you can also, if you're on the go, listen to us as a podcast on Spotify or iTunes. We always put the audio up. And if you're on the website, if you can afford to, buy us a coffee on Ko-Fi or subscribe to our newsletter. And we love all you guys, and we love to stay in touch with you. So I'm not going to take up any more time, but please tune in this Sunday for the special. And with that, I'm going to kick it over to Krista. So take it away, Krista.
Great. Thanks, Michael. Yes, I am really looking forward to Sunday where the gang gets together again. And I can't wait to see where they're going to be airing from, Holly and Craig. I'm sure it's going to be fantastic. So I was thinking about my next topic around divination, and I wanted to go back to my roots a little bit. And so I thought I would talk about numbers. And I started through numerology, and I'm not a numerologist by trade, but when I was in my early 20s, that was the first system I used myself to try to understand myself. And so I'm pretty sure I used Numerology and the Divine Triangle by Dusty Bunker and Faith Javain, and also Your Days Are Numbered by Florence Campbell. And like many people, I wanted to know how I tick. And so, I did my life path number and my name numbers. There's a variety of names for the different numbers when you add them up. And I found it helpful at the time. There's some other things, there's a lot more you can do with numerology. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that in the show. So that was my sort of introduction to the concept of, not just divination with numbers, which you certainly can do, and that's what I'm going to focus on today, but, the idea that you can look at your character, your challenges, your strengths, similar to astrology with numerology. But what exactly does it mean to divine with numbers? Well, it's a really interesting and broad topic. The more I thought about it, the more I thought how people use numbers just without thinking about it in either very superstitious ways or in ways that they celebrate or that it's an unlucky thing. So numbers are kind of really woven into our life, and they're certainly woven into, I would say, the majority of divination systems. So for instance, of course, astrology is based on calculations. And I was thinking even of aspects. If you add up the aspects, what are the numbers? There's a lot of nines in there. Obviously, there's a reason for that. So there's those are the, easy things to look at. I also was thinking about sports numbers, and there's such a big deal. And I didn't have enough time to research, maybe get a really good story about it. But you know how they retire a sports number. I think they do that in hockey. Correct me if I'm wrong, Michael. And that there are numbers that particular athletes feel really connected to their number a lot of times. And so that's really fascinating. And this is, they may not even know about numerology. So that idea that numbers can be kind of lucky for them or give them certain attributes is woven into sports particularly. But when I was thinking about this show, I wanted to sort of also maybe make some suggestions how you can get to know numbers kind of gradually, because, jumping into systems of any kind can be a little overwhelming and confusing. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about that towards the end of the show. But one of the things about numerology that I wanted to bring up is that depending on what the culture is, there are different systems. And so when I first was introduced to numerology, I only knew about the Pythagorean system, and I did not realize that there were other systems that are quite different. And probably the most different system that I only came across couple years ago in this little bit of numerology book by Novalee Wilder is the Chaldean system. And if you do, it's got, a similar ideas that you can get to know yourself through numbers. But one of the most interesting things about the system is they don't use the number 9. And of course, that's going to make the Pythagoreans kind of go crazy. and anyone that likes a system, but it has to do with the fact that it's associated with God. And so it's sort of like, you can't use that number. So at least there's a mystical reason for it. And evidently, I think this is the oldest system in numerology. I'm not 100% sure. And it's also found to have influenced Vedic numerology. And then there's also a Chinese system. So when you go similar to astrology, you're going to, if you decide to get into the numerology, you'll want to figure out what system you want to use through experimentation. And like anything else, when divining with numbers, you're going to want to take notes and really observe the effect that numbers have on you. And that will be a way to see what works for you, what doesn't work for you. And it's like anything else, it just takes some time and experience. Now, what really I got a little more interested just in numbers in general. I mean, I'm always interested because obviously numbers are a big part of tarot cards. And they're part of, when I first started learning the tarot, I could use my understanding of numbers to some degree and interpret some of the cards based on that. And so, but I found that I was reading Carl Jung's book on synchronicity probably about 5 years ago, which is a very somewhat dry book because he was doing real experiments with astrology charts and looking at married people to see if there was any sort of correspondences between charts of married people. And he didn't finish his research, but within the book, there's this part about numbers that is really fascinating. So when we think of numbers, a lot of times with numerology, you'll hear people say, well, it's about vibration and, there's different vibrations in the universe. And then we connect it to musical instruments and all of that. And that is all very true about numbers. But what he talks about, and it's the first time I'd even thought about it, is the idea that numbers are actually archetypes. And I just had never considered them to be an archetype. And so I wanted to sort of also read a little bit from the book about, first of all, how Carl Jung defines an archetype, because a lot of times we use that word, including me, and we haven't really defined it. And of course, this is really just one view, but he certainly has had a huge effect on the concept of archetypes and introducing them into the Western civilization. So this is from Synchronicity, and it is one of his definitions of archetypes. He says, quote, "The archetypes are formal factors responsible for the organization of unconscious psychic processes. They are patterns of behavior. At the same time, they have a specific charge and develop numinous effects which express themselves as affects." So as you can see, he's not the easiest person to read, though that's a pretty clear, statement for Jung. So then he goes on and he starts talking, of course, about synchronicity and how numbers can appear in synchronistic ways. And that is probably one of the most common ways I, as a reader, get clients asking me, hey, I keep seeing this number, blah, blah, and it doesn't have to be 1111, by the way, which is very popular. It can be an odd number, and they'll say, what does it mean? And then I usually have to do research for odd numbers, but also it's very important whenever you see anything that's repetitive that you know what's going on when you see it. So the idea of synchronicity is it's tied into your internal world and it's a reflection of what's going on as well. So you want to take note of what you're thinking about as well as what's happening on the outside, or even sometimes what you're talking out loud about. That's very important. And I have had some times where I can't help the person figure it out. So divining with numbers on one level, there's kind of this basic understanding you can get with numbers that it's just really straightforward. But then when you start looking at synchronicity in numbers, it gets really complicated, actually. I once had a warning that I didn't realize it was a warning, but I knew it was strange. I saw painted on a wall, one of my numbers is 8, and I saw it repeated in red about 5 or 6 times. And then that day, I had some charges on my bank account that had been tripled from a place I'd just gone for my eye examination. And afterwards, I thought, oh, that's what that was about. It was trying to get my attention. And I got it all worked out, but it was just, I knew it was an odd thing. I didn't quite understand what it meant. And that does become important with, if you're going to use numbers and divining, is that each person sometimes has numbers that they just randomly appear and they don't relate to numerology that affect them positively and negatively. And then other times, of course, if you know your numerology chart and you look at the numbers, you can kind of see, maybe what it's trying to tell you both positively or negatively. So anyway, getting back to Jung, he says that about numbers, this is the part that I thought was really fascinating. He says, quote, since the remotest time, men have used numbers to establish meaningful coincidence, that is, coincidences that can be interpreted. There is something peculiar, one might even say, mysterious about numbers. They have never been entirely robbed of their numinous aura. And then he talks about how he thinks that numbers, we didn't discover them, that they were just kind of already in existence, which other people, I guess other cultures have also considered. And he talks a little bit about some of the sacred numbers, some numbers that seem to have special meanings, which you will see in numerology books as well, and then also sometimes in superstitious thoughts. And then he says that more about numbers, that they help more than anything to bring order into the chaos of appearance. Quote, it is the predestined instrument for creating order or for apprehending an already existing but still unknown regular arrangement or orderliness or orderedness. Actually, it's orderedness. Strange use of that word. So basically, this makes a lot of sense when you look at nature. And one of the things that I started doing with numbers, numbers seem a little dry sometimes until you really look into the application and to the physical representation of numbers. And so when you start to look at the way, for instance, with mandalas, the sort of patterns that numbers will form, as well as geometric shapes, squares, triangles, the larger, more complex ones, they get really interesting. And then when you start looking for them in nature, such as, 5 petals and flowers, and, 5 is everywhere in nature, then it becomes really magical. So one of the things I find if you're going to work with numbers is try to do something where you look at them physically, not as just, scribbles on a page, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or math. I personally like math, but I know some people didn't have a good experience with math and math teachers, so that's why they don't like numbers. I think most of us would be completely fascinated with numbers under the right education around it. But I think it's very important to look at the things that they actually create numbers, and then it becomes very mystical and very beautiful as well. So that's something I've been doing more in the last couple years. And then there was one last quote I wanted to say from Carl Jung, and he says, again about numbers, quote, "Hence, it is not such an audacious conclusion, after all, if we define numbers psychologically as an archetype of order, which has become conscious." I love that. An archetype of order, which has become conscious. So now you think of numbers not only as vibrations, which I think is a great way to view numbers, but you see them as archetypes. And then they become more malleable, because you can't have just one fixed idea of an archetype. An archetype really has some common traits in different cultures, but I think they also are very multidimensional. And this is where then when you go to look at a numerology book, for instance, you can see that if there's some differing thoughts about numbers, which there really are, if you look at, for instance, a book that's Chaldean versus Pythagoras, some of the meanings of the numbers are actually quite different, which it did surprise me a little bit. I was just looking at the number 4 was actually quite different. And then if you look into Kabbalah, there can be some nuances that are very different based on the tree of life. But then if you think about it as an archetype, then it becomes a little bit more understandable that perhaps there are different aspects to this archetype. So that was, again, I just love that thought of them being an archetype. It just makes the numbers come alive for me. So the next thing I wanted to talk about, so with numbers, which I sort of already talked about, was the idea of repetition in numbers, lucky numbers, unlucky numbers. So everyone knows, like in China, supposedly number 13, there's no 13th floor, I think it is, or maybe it's here, I can't remember now. But there's different numbers that are unlucky in different cultures. And there are, I suppose, I don't know so much if there's cultural lucky numbers. I think maybe in some of the Eastern worlds there are some, I don't know them, but I think maybe in China and some of the, but when I think about Pythagoras, I don't know if there's any really lucky number, or in the United States, again, it's more specific to someone claiming that number because it's helped them in some form or other. And again, it can be sort of a strange thing. But one of the things I wanted to introduce to you, which is an easy way to get to know numbers and divining with them, is to look at cycles that are very simple to calculate. So one of the easiest things is to look at your cycle for the year. And you could also start with the universal cycle for the year, which is everyone's sort of the broad influence on everyone. And so you just take the number, for instance, 2021, and you add that up and it becomes a 5. And then you take out a book. I like a lot this one. This is Pythagoras. This book is Pythagorean, this numerology book, Spiritual Light Vibrations, but it is out of print. You can still get it. It's not too crazy expensive. I like it because it has the double digits. And I personally think you can start with simple single digits, which I did. And, I reduced everything except perhaps 11 and 22. Even in sort of basic books, they want you to keep the master numbers as they are. So those are the numbers that have repetition, like 1, 1, 2, 2, 3, 3. So those are the only ones you didn't really reduce until the very end. But if you start with, just even like not looking at the double digits, that's perfectly fine. And you look at the universal year, and then you look at your personal year, which is also really super easy to calculate. Basically, you just have to know the day and month and year of your birthday. And then you take the current year and you add to it the month of your birth and day of your birth. I always have to look at this because I forget, to tell you the truth. I don't do it every year. I do it sometimes. And then you can see what year you're under, what cycle you're under, and think about it. And you can see it just maybe as a way of, let's say you want to be in harmony with your world, then you would look and see, how can I be in harmony with this number this year? And then to add to that, you can then look at the monthly cycles, which again is very easy to calculate. So your personal month cycle, you just take the personal year and you take the month that you're in. So you take whatever you're, say if you're in a personal year of a 5 and it's January, you add 1, you've got a 6 personal month. And this way you can, quickly get to know the feeling of some of these cycles. Now, obviously, knowing your numerological chart would make a huge difference in how you relate to these numbers. But having said that, you don't always have to know everything about your charts to intuit things. And at least that has been my experience. I remember I once went to see Stephen Forrest, and I think it was a time where there was a lot going on in my astrology, but I didn't know it. And he remarked that this was a great time for me to get an astrological reading. So I knew something was up intuitively. And so sometimes just knowing yourself really well, and you look at these different meanings to the different numbers and vibrations, you can kind of say, wow, I think I'd get along with this. Oh, this is going to be kind of a challenging year or month for me. And that way, whenever we know what's around us, if we know the vibrations and the metaphysical weather of things, we can work with it more consciously, and we can change our experience of things, and sometimes even change the outcome of things, so that it's not, kind of hitting us, or let's say we're just missing out on something too that's just right there. Maybe it's a great year to meet people and we don't know it and we're lonely. So those are the things that I think any kind of divining or oracle system is trying to help you to become more in harmony with the forces both in you and around you, and to lead the best life you can live. And so that's one reason I like looking at different systems. The other thing that's interesting about numbers is you can get into some really, really deep metaphysical things about it. And recently I've started looking into the number 369 because that's the number for this lodge. And also this is the one that Tesla really was completely obsessed with. And he feels like understanding 369 is the basis of really everything. And the little bit I was watching mostly on YouTube and researching, I can see why he was so into that number. And then you start thinking about, well, why? And then you break it down into 3 and 6 and 9. And then you look at different understandings that you might have of that number, ranging from his views to numerology, to Kabbalah, like where are the 3s, where are the 6s, and they become these great ways of not only just divining things, but basically of thinking about life and mysteries, and numbers are exciting that way, interestingly enough. And I also think that the more you sort of like take a little time and get to know numbers, make friends with them, get over your bad math teacher, is you again can use that in so many ways and enjoy them in different systems, so that it just naturally enhances whatever you're doing. I was even thinking today, I hadn't really thought about the idea that most tarot decks are 78 cards. And, 78 is 12, and 12 is one of those karmic numbers. And karmic numbers, of course, they sound really dramatic and interesting, and then they are. So then I thought, wow, that's kind of cool. I'm going to have to go think about why is, it could have been a different number of cards, and it was 78 that really is considered to be a tarot deck. At least I would say 90% of the time, no, 99% of the time. So you can start really looking at things in that way, so that it's not just divining the future, but it's also helping you to understand how the world ticks. And it's a good thinking tool, I think numbers are. So, and then I haven't even really talked about how, the Kabbalists use the numbers, using assigned numbers with different Hebrew letters, and how complex that is. One area that's very complex to me personally, but it's a huge part of especially the Western occult system, and also, of course, Jewish Kabbalah, and in terms of looking at the Bible and interpreting words in that way. And that can get pretty deep and intricate as well. But just start with it. If numbers are not something you're really familiar with in terms of using in divination, start with something very simple. Perhaps even do just your life path number, which is a very straightforward thing to add that up. And then you can I would suggest looking at a variety of different books, because I found that, for instance, I am an 8, and that's my life path. And I have found that sort of this view of the 8 as the executive seeking power to run companies has never remotely fit me. I have been around powerful people in my life. I've worked for powerful people. I'm a great organizer. But it didn't quite, and I used to think there was something wrong with me until I started finding other interpretations for 8s, and also, looking at it in relationship to my gender and to my astrology chart. And so I have Aquarius ascendant. And so to me, the rebel in me is just not going to want to do things like that, And so there are things about the 8s that are true, but I also found in terms of a life path, it didn't really help me figure my life path out. I had to look at other things and consider, why was I resisting it or not? And I don't think I was resisting it. In fact, I almost got a job at one point with IBM. I remember then it just didn't work out. And that was years and years and years ago. So to me, the life path number is particularly important in numerology because it's something you really can't change, whereas anything with your name you can actually change, and so you can change the vibration of that. And it does seem to throw things at you. So I think that one way in which I started understanding the 8s a little differently was when I was working with the Tree of Life, and it's associated with Mercury. And it's also associated with the left-hand path. And some of the lessons of the left-hand path made a lot more sense to me than what I'd learned in numerology per se. So this is just to give you an idea that you're going to want to think for yourself around the numbers, no matter how, expert the person is, because you are a very unique person, and it's going to allow you just a certain view of yourself. And you're going to want to say, okay, this view with other views are also important, including to me, your cultural background. And in my case, my gender, I did think about it in terms of a woman, what that looks like for me overall. So that's a little bit about, divining with numbers. You can definitely go really deep into it as far as whether it's numerology, whether it's through just working with numbers magically. I think it's something that should be part of everyone's sort of magical knowledge, even if you just say, I'm going to read about the basic numbers, and I'm going to learn, for instance, basically what is the meaning of 0 through 9, and think about it. And that way you'll have sort of some, something to work with as you go deeper into your metaphysical and magical practices. And as I said, it's actually way more interesting than many people realize. It's just as interesting as learning about tarot and astrology. And as I said, well, astrology's got all kinds of numbers in it, right? You got the aspects and the calculations. And then, of course, everybody wants to know about their birthday. And you can also look at, there's a whole system, the destiny cards that have a different take on numbers, and playing cards, which is really fascinating. And most people have enjoyed, if you look it up, just looking up your own numbers is a lot of fun. But anyway, you can sort of start saying, hey, numbers are cool. They're vibration. They're archetypes. They're part of us. They're not just sort of this boring, flat little scribble on a piece of paper is what they look like a lot of times. But in any case, I hope you get inspired to consider numbers as being really an integral part of the universe, and you explore it in your own way. And I appreciate you taking the time out today to listen to me. Just a reminder that I also do readings, and Michael, we both do readings, and you can find us through our website, mysticraven.net, to book readings through our website. It's probably the easiest thing to do. So in any case, I think I'm going to leave you with a little bit of a quote from Carl Jung. And he says that synchronicity, therefore, consists of two factors. An unconscious image comes into consciousness either directly or indirectly in the form of a dream, idea, or premonition. So I want you to remember that, because you can also dream of numbers, and they can have a lot of meaning through dreams. And make sure to take a note of it, because sometimes I forget. So thank you again for listening in. Join us next time as we continue to explore the esoteric and the obscure together. Have a great week.